Are you feeling cynical about your job, irritated all the time, feelings of exhaustion, maybe even suffering through depression or some sort of other physical illness because of job-related stress? If you answered yes to any of these questions, you may be suffering from burnout, and you're not alone. In this episode of the Dumpster Fire Project, Murray and I speak with renowned writer and burnout expert Paula Davis. Paula is a former lawyer turned CEO and founder of the Stress and Resilience Institute. If you're suffering from job-related burnout, or you just want to know what the signs and symptoms are, or how to recover from burnout, you're definitely going to want to check this episode out. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Dumpster Fire Project. Our guest today is a former practicing lawyer and internationally published writer, stress and resilience expert who's taught and coached resiliency and burnout prevention skills to thousands of professionals. She's the founder and CEO of the Stress and Resilience Institute, and her new book, Beating Burnout, Why Teams Hold the Secret to Wellbeing and Resilience, will be available in just a few days. You can pre-order it on Amazon now. She's someone that I really look up to, and having gone through burnout myself, I follow her work, and it's spot on. Paula Davis, thank you for being here. It's an honor to speak with you on the Dumpster Fire Project.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. And thank you so much for following my work. You're always a very enthusiastic responder and commenter to my posts and things. So I appreciate that.
Well, if you would have saw me when I was the chief deputy at the DA's office and how burnout I was, you'd say, "Yeah, that's the kind of guy that would follow my work right there." So yeah, awesome. Really quick before we kind of dive into your story, because it's an awesome story. Tell us about the Stress and Resilience Institute and what you do there.
Yeah, so I really, myself and my team really spend a lot of time just working within organizations, spending a lot of time with teams and individuals within the legal profession and certainly across industry. Just teaching and training and coaching the skills associated with building resilience, again, at the individual, team, leader, organizational level. And then also talking a lot, of course, about burnout prevention and different strategies, again, across the system that folks can start to deploy to create more positive cultures so that burnout is less likely to happen. So, starting to do a little bit more of my own original research. I do a lot of writing on various publications, but my favorite thing to do is really the teaching and training part.
Nice, very good. And you got a new book coming out that when this episode comes out, a couple of days. Tell us about the new book.
Yes, I'm so excited. It's very weird because, when I found out I was going to be writing this book, which is called Beating Burnout at Work, Why Teams Hold the Secret to Resilience and Wellbeing, I started it before the pandemic happened. Little did we know that this is what the world would engineer. So it became a very interesting time to be writing a book about burnout. So I learned a lot of lessons going through that, both for myself and then through the people who I interviewed and talked to for the book. But yeah, it turned out to be, really just this amazing experience, a great learning experience. This is my first time writing a book. So, I just hope folks enjoy it.
Yeah, book writing is one of those experiences where I wrote a book as well, and when you start out, it's just so daunting. You're like, how am I going to write a book? How am I going to do, like, there's publishers and all this, and it's like once you get through it and look back on it, like, what was I afraid of? Like, that was nothing. That was easy, and it was fun.
And it's funny in the acknowledgments of my book, that's how I started. I said, writing a book is fun and stressful and rewarding and stressful. It was all of that and more. And you're right. It's as soon as you get done with it, you sort of have a process now or a template that you can use. And now you're like, I want to write another book and I'm going to write 12 books. And because you know how to navigate through that and what it means. And there's so many lessons that I learned and stuff I'll do differently next time, but other things that I'll keep. But yeah, it was a learning experience in a number of different ways.
We'll leave a link to the book in the description below. It's on Amazon, obviously, and if you're watching this episode when it first comes out, you can pre-order it, but it'll be out in a few days. So I can't wait to get it. It looks like it's exactly the kind of thing that we've been talking about on this podcast a lot, Murray, and it seems to be spot on. If it's like you've got a lot of other articles out there, the article that you wrote, I fought the law and the law won. That's when I think I realized that I knew there was something wrong with me, but when I read that article, I was like, holy crap, I'm going through burnout because it was the same stuff.
Well, and I think that's I mean, part of the reason why I wrote that article is to talk a little bit about my own story, of course, because that's where I was. I mean, this was more than 10 years ago, but I remember it vividly. I remember the entire process, and it was more than a year of just feeling completely horrible. And I remember too, like I didn't know what burnout was. I mean, I knew there was a word called burnout, but I didn't know that it was now applying to me. I didn't know kind of what the symptoms were or the warning signs or what should I have been doing differently, or everyone else looks fine. What is it about me that is all of a sudden it seemed not able to kind of deal with my stress? And so I get it. I think there's still so much education that has to be done all across the board in terms of understanding what it is that we're really talking about right now. Because I think we misuse the term a lot. I think we use it in place of just the word stress. So, like, we come home and we have a bad day or we have a stressful day. I guess we're not coming home, we're still home. And we say, oh my gosh, I'm so burned out. When we might mean, I've just had a stressful day. And so we've blurred what burnout is, and we've lost the distinction between that and stress. And so um, there are a lot of different myths and things I wanted to clear up in my book, and that I've learned too, because I started, thinking about it the wrong way as well. So that was important.
Yeah, and
So
then
what's
for any of the listeners that are interested, I believe on your website you have a free downloadable PDF that at least starts to dive into that a little bit. So if anyone's
Yeah.
interested, definitely go check that out. So we're got a general understanding of the business, but I'm always curious to hear, how did you get there? Like, everyone has that day where they're like, all right, I'm gonna go do this instead of what I'm currently doing. So what was that like for you?
Yeah, so it's like as Erik mentioned, it's I fought the law and the law won. So I practiced for 7 years and then burned out. Interestingly, I didn't go through that process. It was very much a process for me to try and think about like what was my next step going to be, because I thought, well, maybe I'll just go back. I was practicing in-house at a company, and so I thought, oh, I'll just go back to the law firm that I was at, and then I was like, no, that just didn't feel right, and so really gave some thought to what I should be doing, and then was like, oh, I'll become a pastry chef because I love to bake, right? So that I applied to pastry school in New York City. I was going to move to New York City for 6 months. I really honestly still don't know what I was thinking with all of this. And then I ended up being able to do like a little internship at this kind of cool swanky restaurant in San Francisco near where my brother worked. And he's like, I can get you in for like a week. You can test it out. You'll love it. And that's what I thought. And so I took some vacation time from my work and I went to San Francisco, stayed with my brother, and did this pastry internship. And within like the first 2-3 hours of starting, I was like, this stinks. Like, I can't do this. This is not what I thought it was. This isn't what I want to do. Now what do I do? Because I've got to kind of finish the rest of the days here. Like, I don't want to just like quit on them and say I can't do this. So I legged it out for the rest of the week. And it wasn't completely all horrible. I mean, but it was very obviously not the path that I was supposed to take. And so that, I think, really was part of what caused my burnout to get worse, because I thought I had figured out what I was supposed to do, and that felt better. Like, it felt energizing. I had that side hustle that I could kind of pay attention to in the evenings when I was feeling, horrible from a day's worth of work, and all of a sudden that was taken away. And so it was a blessing, really, because it really forced me to do the deep work, have the deeper conversations with myself around what is it that I really wanted to do. It's more than just finding something that you think you're good at or that you like, but it's really kind of how do you craft a sustainable career over a period of time, and what did I need to tap into to make that happen. And so being very intentional about that was huge. And that's my biggest piece of advice for people when they ask me about this, is just to be intentional. Don't just like throw a dart at a dartboard and see like, woo, maybe I'll go to pastry school, or maybe I'll, like move to the Bahamas and start that bar or whatever. Really give some thought to what it is that you think makes sense. And it was at that time I actually hired a coach, and I saw her name in a magazine in the airport and called her up and just said, hey, are you taking clients? And she had just finished the master's in applied positive psychology program at the University of Pennsylvania. And I thought, what is that? That sounds amazing, because my undergrad is in psychology and I've always loved that science. And she explained it to me, and instantly I knew, I'm like, this is something that has to be part of my next step. And I researched it and started reading, Marty Seligman's work and Barb Fredrickson and all of the luminaries in the science, and just really never looked back. And so applied to the program and luckily got in, because that would have been a big problem. That would have been a hurdle, but got in and just really, fell in love with the science of resilience, and, thinking about how to use that skill set and framework to help people just better deal with adversity and challenge and obstacles and the things that kind of give rise to a lot of our stress. So that's really the long story in terms of how I got here. And really just, being willing to say yes to things that I didn't think were going to come my way. So when I was finishing my year at Penn, the Army had reached out to Penn and said, "Hey, can you create this resilience training course for our senior NCOs and our officers? Because we don't want them to just learn the skills of resilience. We want them to be able to teach them and take them back to our troops." So it was this train the trainer, 9-10 day program. And I had a chance to apply to be part of the faculty, the training team, and then they said yes to that. And I kicked into what I thought was going to be this very short-term thing that lasted almost 4 years, which was really very much the second part of my education. Coming out of the legal profession, it's like, I don't know how to teach adults how to learn. I'm just a lawyer. And really seeing how to do that became, really instrumental, and it was a life-changing project for me on so many levels. So yeah, so it's just sort of like putting one foot in front of the other. I never would have conceived of, oh, you're going to work with soldiers one day. How is that going to happen? But so it's just things lining up and saying yes to things, and builds on each other, and here we are.
How did that lead into starting the Stress Resilience Institute? Did you kind of know you wanted to start that, or was it just a transition that kind of happened?
So I knew I wanted to have my own business. I come from a very entrepreneurial family. So my parents had a business for 15 years, nothing like what I do. It's a plastic injection molding. But I really grew up, as a kid, seeing the value and the benefits of entrepreneurship. I have a lot of family members who, being in the state of Wisconsin, they own their own farms. A lot of family members who have owned restaurants, other businesses, and things like that. And so we're a very business minded family. And I knew that was going to be part of my journey at some point. So when I left to go to Penn, I had actually formed the company. And boy, I thought I kind of understood what I wanted to do. I had no clue what I was doing. And so I was trying to describe my background to my classmates at Penn, and they sort of just looked at me like, "Girl, you don't have it figured out yet." And I really didn't. But I had this thing. I had this organization. And so what I tried to do was, when I wasn't at school, or when I wasn't, then working, doing the military trainings, is I just started doing, workshops, and I started to try and synthesize some of the research that I was learning. And I started to, initially write some articles and things like that. And, just tried to see what stuck, and kind of reached out to people to see what they were interested in, and thinking, how can I bring this into the legal profession? And so it was a little ahead of the curve in that regard, because the legal profession said, "Oh, this is lovely. See you bye. We're not ready for it yet." Which was, an interesting hurdle.
Everybody get back to work. Stop reading that
Everybody
article.
get back to work, bill some more hours, right? And so, so yeah, so it was an entity in the sense that I had started something, but it really didn't galvanize until I finished the work with the military. And so that was in 2014, where I now had at least a lot more expertise, a lot more understanding about how to kind of deliver this stuff, and then was able to really crystallize in terms of more of a focus and where I wanted to go. And so I would say it's been phased. So since 2014 has really been when I've been 100% focused in my business.
It sounds like you had a lot of open doors in front of you and you just said yes, like let's try it and I'll figure it out one day at a time.
100%. And I'm a big fan of, like, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. So I always, I'll ask the question or I'll ask for an opportunity, and it's true. I mean, it's very rare that people will say no or won't want to help you when you express an ask in terms of, wanting to be helped, or hey, could I try this, or can I just come in and chat with your organization, and just see what they say.
So on that, I'm actually curious, because of the field you're in, have you had to say no to stuff to make sure you don't reach that burnout or stress level? Like, what are some of those things that you've had to balance specifically with your career now?
So hard because I have an almost 5-year old daughter, and trying to navigate. I always tell people that my business is like my second child, because they'll say, are you going to have more kids? And I'm like, no, my business is my second child. And really, both Lucy and my business need a tremendous amount of attention and water and food, and otherwise things will not go well. And so I always joke with people that my business is, my second kid. And um, so yeah, I mean, really trying to prioritize that. And there is some point in every year for the last handful of years where I have said to myself, like, I can't take on anymore. I need to build my team in a different way, or something has to change structurally, because I have felt like I'm walking up to that line. And thankfully, I now recognize what that looks like for myself, which is super helpful. But at the same time, I keep thinking to myself, like, I'm supposed to be helping people not burn out, and now I feel like I'm burning out. That's bad. So I certainly have moments where I have to pause. I still fight my constellation of traits around. I say yes to everything. I don't like to ask for help. Um, I'm a high need for achievement professional, things like that. And so those traits get in my way. And so even though I teach how to manage that, I'm constantly applying that to myself as well. And so I've gotten a little bit better about, like, gosh, if my last meeting ends at 3, I'm going to go home and go for a run before I have to go pick up Lucy, or, just really trying to take advantage of some of those smaller moments, because I wasn't doing that as intentionally. And it's really been helpful. So I just kind of, for me, thinking in those micro moments or little micro opportunities to build in some of that has been helpful.
Yeah, that's great advice.
It's a constant challenge, though.
Yeah, Murray's trying to do a really good podcast here, and I'm just going to go back a little bit because I'm still trying to figure out what happened to me. When you decided to leave when you were a lawyer, did you know that you were going through burnout? Did you know about burnout then, or did you just know that you were really stressed out and something had to change?
So my burnout lasted, I would say, at least about a year. And initially, no, I didn't know. And I think this is very common for people. You sort of enter that space where you feel exhausted more frequently. Things just start to shift, and you notice that, wow, I just went through my busy season, for example, and I'm not bouncing back to my normal stress levels the way that I used to. Like, those small little shifts started to happen, and I started to really just way over prioritize work. So I stopped playing co-ed softball. Like, I stopped playing, my co-ed touch football leagues and all of the sports stuff that I like to do. I stopped hanging out with my friends as much. So it was just that progression over time, kind of adding up. And then I started to feel really cynical. So I now know that that is a big dimension of burnout. So that's not my personality, but people just started to bug me. And my clients, like, you really, like, we have to have this call again. Can't you handle this on your own? Like, you're not going to listen to my advice anyway, so why are we doing this? Never said that to them, but internally, that's how I was thinking about all of this. And then felt that sense of relief, I think, once I had identified the pastry opportunity, and then really sunk once I realized that wasn't going to happen. And then I started to get pretty sick. So I started to notice that. So I practiced commercial real estate law. So every time I would close a deal, and I was closing multiple deals a month, like, the adrenaline kept me focused and lawyering well. But then when it stopped, I would get a headache, or I would get a cold, or I would get a stomach ache. And that started to happen frequently, like monthly, at least monthly. And then that progressed into, I started to have panic attacks. So my anxiety started to resurface. And then that got worse. And then I ended up in the emergency room twice because I had really bad stomach aches and needed some help with that. And so it was this kind of year-long progression of, yeah, I'm just stressed and kind of trying to deal with that, into really a very not great position for a little bit of time. And it was really at that point, I mean, I remember walking out of the emergency room like the second time thinking, this is really stupid. Like I have to, I have to figure this out. And that was really when the powerful shift made it so that I was like, I got to figure this out now. And I've just got to make a shift. And so I always encourage people, like, recognize when you're back at that kind of initial point, because there's way more that we can do to kind of help that versus when you're walking out of the emergency room for the second time and you realize like this can't go on, or you're just going to have a breakdown. So
I think our stories are pretty similar. That sounds a lot kind of like what happened to me, because when I first became a prosecutor, I absolutely loved it. It was what I wanted to do, trials, and it took about 6 7 years when I all of a sudden became, managing attorney, and I was in charge of people. I had the same huge caseloads, but all the other stress that went along with it. And it was about like my last year as a prosecutor that it really started to like build up. And it was the same thing. I started getting cynical about everything.
mhm.
Like a TV show would come on, and I'd be like, oh, here we go, another TV show about somebody wrongfully convicted. Nobody wants to talk about the 10 guilty people that got off that I prosecuted. I don't even know why we have jury trials anymore. What's the point? And that same thing, I used to love working with younger attorneys, and I
Mhm.
used to take a lot of value from working with victims of crimes and helping them. And everything just started to become annoying. Felt like my work wasn't doing anything, and bad habits like coming home and instead of having a couple beers on the weekend, it was like I can't get to the fridge fast enough to
Yep.
open the beer after the end of the day. And I had a moment where I just realized like this, I can't do this anymore. And it took me about a year after I got out of that and went to a different job, which is still in the legal field, but a lot less stressful to like reflect on it. And then I saw like your articles and I realized like these are all the symptoms. And I see that all the time in a lot of the coworkers, especially in like, prosecutors, public defenders, where you have a ton of demand and no resources.
Yes.
One of the things I see a lot is these guys and girls that I work with, they realize something's wrong, but then they just think, well, I'm going to go to a different office or a different law firm, and within a couple of weeks, the same stuff that they try to leave comes right back. Is that something that you've seen when you work with organizations, and how can people deal with that? Like, what do you do?
Yeah, so I think what you're highlighting is, one of my big themes in my book, and where sort of my aha moments as I've been studying this over the last 10 years, where I initially positioned burnout as an individual self-help stress management problem, right? Because we focus on the exhaustion layer in particular that is so associated and strongly associated with burnout. And we think, well, if we're chronically exhausted, we just need to exercise more, we just need to sleep more, we should meditate, we should do some yoga, things along those lines. And none of that stuff is bad. And those are all good stress management strategies. But when you're talking about burnout, you're talking about a different animal. And so we have to switch the conversation from just looking at this as an individual sort of stress management self-help issue into realizing it's very much more a systemic problem, meaning it draws in a lot of elements of like workplace culture, of leadership, of how teams are run and organized. I mean, even when you think like real macro level, the different regulations that a lot of industries are experiencing and the changes that they're going through trickle down into how organizations talk about different challenges, which influences how leaders lead, which influences how teams are run. And all of that seeps down then into the frontline individual workers. And so we have to start addressing that other piece of the puzzle. And I think what you're talking about is just proof of that, because we think that we can just escape it and go to another workplace. And if we're lucky and we're at a workplace that really prioritizes and knows how to build the type of culture that prevents burnout, which very few do, you might get lucky and then escape it. But oftentimes we just find ourselves, we get a boost for a while because we're in a new environment, we're excited and this is great. And then all of a sudden you start to realize like, whoa, I'm starting to feel this thing again. And there are, you talked about the imbalance between job demands and job resources. And that's really the basic formula that sprouts burnout. We have too many demands and not enough resources. And we know that there's kind of a core cluster of specific demands per the research that organizations and teams and leaders really need to focus on. And it's things like your level of workload. We think that we can keep piling stuff on people without consequences. And as high need for achievement professionals, we have a hard time saying no anyway, right? So we just say yes, and then it piles on. But workload is very much a huge driver um, of burnout, or can be at least. It's lack of recognition, right? I don't feel like anyone notices that I'm doing a good job. I'm not being thanked. It's, do you feel like you have a collegial environment, a supportive leader, a support system within your work environment? Do you have a sense of autonomy? Do you have a say in, what I do when I go to work, when I can start, when I can leave, decisions that impact my work? Am I included on those? So it's those kind of core things that we have to start addressing and talking about and thinking about if we're going to reverse burnout, because otherwise we're just going to kind of, rinse and repeat in terms of the process. So that's a big takeaway from my book, is really shifting that conversation.
Yeah, you just said so many great things, and I manage a design team, and so for any of my other friends out there who are managers, so many things you just said about how to focus internally. As a manager, you have to realize you control not putting that on some other people. I'm one of those managers who's not afraid to say no. Like I track my resources, I make sure they're well balanced, they're happy. I give them
Mhm.
praises. We've got all kinds of processes in place to make sure that they're getting proper communication, that they feel that they can come to me in an open and safe environment and
Mhm.
express their concerns if they are feeling it or whatever is going on. So everything you just said is very, very important for not just the individual but also somebody else who's in a position who can influence the individuals as well.
100%. And I just want to punctuate what you're talking about. You didn't use the scientific term, but exactly what you're talking about is creating a culture of psychological safety. So that's one of the key. I put together this framework in my book for leaders and teams and people within teams to follow in terms of different pathways that actually, build resilience at the team level and thriving in these positive cultures. And one of the foundational elements very clearly leaps out of the research, which is psychological safety. It's creating that sense of trust at the group level where I feel like I can approach you and say, look, I'm having a hard time, or no, I disagree with you, or shouldn't we be doing it this way? Or, you know what, I think I kind of messed up here. It's opening the door to allow for all of that. So without the risk of feeling like you're going to be talked about or singled out or penalized or put down some way. And it's such a powerful sort of concept or ability to be able to create within your work environment. And it's built with just really simple little micro interpersonal interactions consistently over time. So I always tell organizations, and I tell leaders, and I tell people, you can be making or breaking this type of like positive or right culture in 5 or 10 minute little increments of interaction that either go one way or the other way consistently throughout your week and your month or what have you, that become just so critical to building the right environment that can make burnout less likely to happen. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, and you said it way better than I did, but at least I'm aware of the concept.
Yes, now you know. Do more of that.
I hope this podcast provided some value for you. On this channel, Murray and I take you along with us on our real-time journey trying to figure out how to become entrepreneurs. In the process, we bring on experts to teach us and you how to do it. So please consider hitting that subscribe button down there. You can also find the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever app you use to listen to podcasts. Until next time, never settle, never regret.